Welcome to C4C's technical interviewing workshop. Today, I'll be teaching you a little bit about how to smartly grind interview prep and balance it along with schoolwork, as well as tips during the actual interview you can use to leave a good impression. Okay, so what exactly is a technical interview? A technical interview will typically be a coding challenge or questions that assess your knowledge in computer science, engineering, and math disciplines. There are three main types, really, of technical interviews that I've seen before. The first are just like pop quiz questions and brain teasers, like what is the time complexity of binary search? And these are like quick ask then answer. So this would be like, oh, log in. And questions of like another nature just to see how you think, such as why are manhole covers round? Like this, if you've ever seen this question before, like you'll know that there are multiple answers to this question. One of mine is just like, because it makes them easy to roll. So the next type of format that I've seen before is a take-home assessment. What this will usually convey is it'll ask you to make a basic web app with your standard create, read, update, or delete operations, or perhaps design a REST API. Some of the things we do in C4C when working on real projects. But the most common type of technical interview involves data structures and algorithms, which is also called whiteboarding by other people. And it's really common to see this format in bigger companies, especially like FANG companies like Facebook or Microsoft. So the focus of this workshop will be tackling those data structures and algorithms whiteboarding questions. For these types of interviews, there's usually 3 rounds until you get an offer. There's the online assessment, which is conducted by a hacker rank sent to your email that you open up and just answer coding questions in an allotted amount of time. The phone screen might be with a recruiter or an actual engineer asking you behavioral questions, or giving you a link to a live coding interface where you can answer their questions. And the final round is called an onsite because before the pandemic, you would take a plane ride to the company or just travel to meet engineers in person and interview with them. And it's also called the final round. Okay. So with that said, why do these exist? If you look on the right, I think this tweet by Max Howell, who was like the creator of Homebrew, said that he failed a technical interview because he couldn't invert a binary tree. And this has sort of become the rallying cry of people who hate these types of interviews. They ask how this is relevant to the job, and I'm here to say that it's not, but you still need to get good at them because you will be asked them in interviews. This will not change anytime soon. And here's really the main reason why. If you go into an algorithms-based interview, when a company uses this type of interview, they can quickly filter out a lot of candidates. And on the upside, these interviews are extremely hard to BS your way through. Think about it like this. Every computer science major will have taken a course in data structures and algorithms. And data structures and algorithms is one of those fields where anybody can get reasonably good at if you put in time and effort, which makes it very attractive. Furthermore, like when you're being tested on data structures and algorithms, it takes longer to develop that mathematical intuition that takes like years of schooling versus like learning a new JavaScript framework that you could learn through a YouTube tutorial or just by Googling Medium articles. And last thing I want to say for this slide is, even though take homes might be more practical to the job, they take super long to evaluate, are subjective, and will cost you more time depending on each company. So you need to see, so the best way to deal with these types of interviews is understand like initially why they exist and the benefits of using this format of interview compared to other formats. Let's move on. So, getting started. How should you prepare for these types of interviews? The two most common resources that people talk about are Cracking the Coding Interview, which is an amazing interview book by a well-respected author in Silicon Valley hiring. And then there's a second resource called LeetCode, which is an interactive website where you can submit answers to common coding questions you might be asked in these interviews. But I will say that the most important piece of advice I have is to take CS 3000 as soon as possible if you haven't. This is so important, and I don't see it really stressed anywhere else. CS 3000, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is Northeastern's course in data structures and algorithms. And it's important because you need to get exposed to those data structures, big O runtime, and algorithms like dynamic programming. You should ideally have knowledge of that before going into these interviews. And it makes it easier to start on the LeetCode grind afterwards. Now, if you're crunched on time, what I recommend is essentially going through a few specific chapters of Cracking the Coding Interview to get started. These are the intro, specifically section 4, because I think that's the part that goes over big O notation, as well as chapters 1 through 6, 8, and 10. Those should go over rudimentary data structures, as well as like algorithmic tricks and tactics. The rest of the chapters are great, and certainly read them if you have time, but it's just these chapters that are like the meat of the content that can be used in algorithmic interviews. And if you're crunched on time and don't exactly know which LeetCode problems to do, I would recommend Googling for a list called the Blind 75. And Blind is just a website that's like a professional network. And this list is really nice, but I just don't recommend looking at the website beyond that. So with that said, let's just go on to LeetCode so you guys can get a feel for what the interface is supposed to look like. So let me stop my screen share for a second. Can all of you guys see LeetCode on my screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so this is what LeetCode looks like. As you can see on the front page, there's banners telling you which contests are coming up if you're interested in that. And there are also posts that detail compensation offers and interview experiences that some of you might find intriguing. The important part of this website, however, is the problem category. And as you can see, problems have a certain difficulty attributed to them, a certain acceptance rate. This usually indicates like how many submissions versus how many times people got it right. Some of these problems have solutions available to them. So you could look at that if you're stuck. And problems can be split into categories as well. So let's take, for example, the first problem that people do on LeetCode, usually twosome. And let me just reset that. So as you can see, you have this interface where you're told the problem title, the problem description, followed by a couple of examples, constraints, and hints if you choose to use them. And you can see the related topics here. So if you get stuck, you can look at these and it should guide you in the right direction on how to solve this problem. In addition to where you can submit your solution, I think that the discuss section is very good because like after you submit your solution, it helps you learn to see how other people have solved the question. And in doing so, you can learn the approaches that more experienced developers have for these problems. So let's take an example of this guy's solution. And the great thing about this is that solutions and posts are always followed up by insightful comments pointing out what can be improved, what makes it easy, what makes your solution easier to understand. And if you don't understand something about the code itself, chances are somebody else won't, and they will put it in words in which it's understandable to you. So besides problems, if you're starting out, I would also recommend the LeetCode Explore section because there's this really nice learn category where you can solve problems by category. And there's even, let's say we go to recursion, there's even like some articles you can read that might help you recognize patterns in these problems. That's pretty much all there is to see on LeetCode. I'm sure like most of you guys can figure out more of the nuances of LeetCode in your free time. So let's continue with the rest of the presentation. So let me open back Keynote. Can everybody see the slide I'm on right now, LeetCoding tips?
Yes.
Cool. So I have a couple of tips for anybody who is looking forward to doing LeetCode problems or is just starting out. And the first of which is don't look at problem categories, try not to, because the point of doing LeetCode problems is to develop this sense of pattern recognition. Your goal in doing LeetCode is to do a problem and understand the approach behind it. And by looking at the problem category, you ruin that process for yourself. But although it is okay if you are just trying to specifically practice for a specific algorithm or data structure, or if you're stuck and need a guiding line. Second tip would be to just pick a language with concise, expressive, and terse syntax. And for me, this means Python, but other examples are Ruby. The reason you want to do this is because when you're in a coding interview, your time is limited and you need to be able to get your thoughts out in code quickly. So if you don't really have a preference on what language to use, or you're not like really tied to a language, I'd recommend learning Python to go at LeetCode problems. The thing with like languages like Java and C++ is that it takes you might have to write a new class to get a certain data structure you want, whereas in Python, you could probably just use a tuple to associate two values together. Third tip would just be don't abuse the run button. And the reason for this is because in an actual interview, the interviewer won't look kindly if you try again and again to get the solution right. You should aim to understand your solution and figure out what the bugs are and if it makes sense on the first run. Look through your code mentally and really try to understand what it's doing. And with that said, most of the time you'll be able to run without a bug. Fourth tip would be to not cram LeetCode. I made a mistake before in that right before an interview, I would probably just like grind like 50 LeetCode problems the weekend before. And I'm here to tell you that it doesn't work, because if you're doing that many LeetCode problems in that short amount of time, you won't be able to process the approaches behind those problems. You're just memorizing. And even if the interviewer gives you a question with a slight twist on those problems you've already seen, you won't be able to get it. So really take it slow and easy, do one a day. And when you do that one a day, do it well. Fifth tip would be to aim for the dumb solution first and then try to get the better solution. Unless you are absolutely sure you know what the better solution is and are confident you can code it up immediately. You can, like, sometimes during an interview, your interviewer might even just be okay with the dumb solution. Just get something down that works and the problem will be solved. The goal behind LeetCoding, as I mentioned, is to learn approaches. Don't make it your goal to do as many as possible. Don't like look at somebody who's done like, oh, like I've done 600 LeetCode problems. Like I've only done like 50. Just don't do that. Your goal is to learn approaches, and it can take people only 30 problems, but others can need like 500 to feel comfortable with that pattern recognition. And I really like this quote from Bruce Lee that says, "I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I do fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times." Really try to ingrain the process of solving these problems in your head. Bonus points afterwards if you can explain your solution to a friend, because what explaining your solution to a friend does is, if you don't quite understand the code you wrote, then in an effort to explain it, you will start to understand more and you will improve your communication skills. So when you actually have an interview and the interviewer is confused on what your code is trying to do, you will develop this sense of communication that will do you well. Final tip, very underrated. If you ever get discouraged by the interview process, or like you feel like, oh, I can't solve like any LeetCode problems, like just call your family and friends and they should be able to cheer you up. Okay, so a huge problem I've seen with people and LeetCode is that it's hard to stay disciplined. Now, is anybody in this audience afflicted by this? Like they start LeetCoding at some time, but like they stop and then they just like lose motivation. Like, has that happened to anybody before? Yeah, definitely. Okay. So really what I have to say about this is do one a day, no matter what. Just force yourself to do one a day and don't stop. Because here's the thing, if you do one a day, in a year, you will have done over 300. In 2 years, you'll have done 700. And what I personally do is just like as soon as you wake up or like have gotten your cup of coffee, spend around 30 minutes trying to solve the daily LeetCode problem. It's totally okay if you don't get it. And if you can't, try again for 30 minutes at night, because you might need some time to have your brain sit on it. And if you still can't get it, then it's by all means just look at the answer. Like looking at the answer and learning the approach to the problem is far more efficient than trying to get stuck on it and getting stuck on it for a long time and then just forgetting about it and losing motivation. Just look at the answer if you're stuck. Now, when you look at the answer though, it should be your goal to understand the answer. And like I mentioned while browsing the LeetCode website, is on Discuss, chances are people will get stuck on the same part of solution code that you are. So if something doesn't make sense in the solution code, it probably won't make sense for somebody else. And what you do then is just go through the comments and look for a comment that can explain it really well. It's even better if you can watch a YouTube video and draw pictures for yourself to understand the approach behind this problem. Because as we know, writing stuff down is a lot better than typing and not writing stuff down. Okay, so does anybody have questions so far? Okay, so one last thing I forgot to mention on this slide is that make use of your winter breaks very well. Make use of your Thanksgiving break, your spring break, your winter break, because that is the window of time where you do have time to sit down, LeetCode, read Cracking the Coding Interview, and do a LeetCode problem, and perhaps do the follow-up LeetCode problems.
Hey, Brandon, there was a question in the chat.
Okay, like it's just hard for me to like open up the chat.
Yeah, I'll read it out for you. It said, I know that there are some cram school to help you practice and pass a technical interview, but do you think it's worth it? It usually takes about 3 months. Do you think it would be better just practice by yourself on LeetCode?
Like, this is an interesting question because like I hear people say that like you can just do this by yourself and just stay disciplined, but I know that some people will benefit from using a paid resource that will tailor things to them. So I think it's really up to you to decide whether that works for you. I would just try to, like, if you can trial that course and if you enjoy it, then I would go for it. But I would try to go at it. I would try to go at LeetCode for yourself first. And does that answer your question? Yeah, no problem. Okay. It's always like hard to like I have the group chat open right now and it's okay. There we go. Okay, afterwards. So in a coding interview itself, there are usually 6 steps I take to produce an optimal result. And the 6 steps are as follows. The first step you should take is to restate the question in your own words to the interviewer. This helps because like, as soon as you do this, if I was interviewing you, I would be able to tell that you can communicate well. It would establish that we are on the same page, that I understood your question. Second step is really, really important, and that is to ask clarifying questions. We'll go over examples of what clarifying questions are good to ask in the next few slides, but you want to ask clarifying questions about things like the inputs and the outputs, because oftentimes the interviewer will be intentionally vague to see if you will ask clarifying questions. And if you're interviewing and coding a code snippet up and the interviewer tells you like, oh, but did you consider this case? That's usually like a really, really bad sign. Avoid that. Try to clarify things before coding. After clarifying, the next step you should do is to go over examples. We'll do that as an exercise in the next few slides, but in going over examples, the goal is to make sure you understand what the problem is trying to ask, why an input leads to an output, and you can reveal your thought process in coding your solution up before you actually start typing to the interviewer. Fourth step is just to start coding. And I think in this step, you should try to avoid being silent, because this really is an interview about your thinking and thought process more so than it is about your technical skill and knowledge. So if the interviewer doesn't understand the code that you're writing, it's really not good. Fifth step would be to don't immediately announce you're done or ask a question like, is this good? What you should do is look for mistakes when walking through your code mentally, line by line. Do that. And then for the 6th step, just automatically suggest, hey, let's just test it on this example to make sure that it works. Test your examples with your code and provide a big O analysis. If the interviewer is satisfied with that, the interview usually ends there, or you may be asked to follow up, in which case just repeat these 6 steps again. And I'm sure you guys learned about something in Fundies 1. Does that remind you of anything? I'm sure it does. Okay. What does the chat say, Liam?
We got TDR, the design recipe. People are getting it.
Okay, so what we're going to do for the remainder of this workshop is just to walk through a specific LeetCode question with these 6 steps. And what I'm going to do is ask, are there any brave volunteers among my audience who are willing to give this a shot? The exercise is to just restate this question to me. And please, like when doing this, please unmute your mic because I have a hard time reading the chat due to how Keynote works. So any brave volunteers?
I see some C4C developers. I know they can do it. One of you guys have to step up.
I don't want to call on anybody to do this.
Hi, can I give it a try?
Yeah, definitely. Sure. Yeah. What do you got?
It's just that we need to find out if there is any element in the given array it is given that we are giving an array of integers, right? So if there is any integer that is repeated in the given array, we need to find if there is any integer repeated in the array. And do we need to return the integer which is repeated, or the number of integers that are repeated?
The question is find if, but yeah,
So it's
I
just
really,
that we'll be returning true or false. That's it, right?
exactly. Yeah. That already like leads me to the next step, but that's really good. Yeah, that's a really good restate of the question. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
And this would be my example of how I would say this to an interviewer. So I would be like, okay, so essentially I'm seeing if the array you give me has an element occurring multiple times. Okay. Now let's move on to step 2. So step 2 is I want you to come up with at least 2 to 3 clarifying questions for the interviewer in case you got asked this question. So can a brave volunteer come up with the first clarifying question for me? Just unmute your mic.
If the array is empty, should you throw an error?
Exactly. Yep. If the array is empty, you can just return false. Okay. Who's going to come up with the second clarifying question?
What's the largest size array that we could be given?
Great question. Assume that the array has a limitless size. Finally, who wants to take the last question?
Could it be if there's a specific time complexity or space that they're looking for to for the algorithm to be solved in?
Sure. For that, I would say just don't worry now. Focus on getting a solution. Okay. Thank you guys for that. Let's move. So the questions that I came up with were 4. And the first question is, can I assume that if there is a duplicate element, would it be repeated more than 2 times? If multiple elements are duplicated, do I just return the first duplicate element that I see when scanning left to right? The input type is a list and the output type is a Boolean, right? How about null elements or just a null list altogether? These are all examples of clarifying questions you should ask. And even if the answer seems obvious, just by asking these, you'll show that you've thought about the problem thoughtfully to the interviewer, and that looks really good. Okay, so does anybody want to walk through these examples with me? Can somebody volunteer and walk through the base cases with me?
If the given array is empty, we will be just returning false. And if there is only one element in the array, we will be returning false because there won't be any elements that would be repeated in an empty array and in an array having only one integer.
Okay, yeah, I like that explanation. Does anybody want to walk me through the concrete cases? Okay.
I can walk through it with you, Brandon.
Yeah, what's up?
So in the first case, as we're going through the array, we find that 1 is repeated twice, so we return true.
Yep.
In the second case, we only have 2 elements, but they're the same element, so they're duplicated, we also return true.
Yep.
In the third case, we walk through every element, but each element is unique, so we return false.
Yep, that sounds good to me. Excellent. Okay, now comes the fun part. Does anybody want to be a brave volunteer and walk me through coding this up on LeetCode itself. I won't bite, I promise.
Connor, Aaron, Varun, Max. And you guys want to step up?
I would love to, Liam. Thank you for asking.
There we go.
All right.
All right.
Let's go, Juan.
Are you pulling it up or do you want me to pull it up?
Actually, what would you prefer? Like, I can pull it up and you can tell me exactly what to code up. Or like you can code it up yourself and pretend that I gave you this as a link.
Brandon, let's have you code it up so everyone else can see it on the screen.
Sure thing.
You've got it on your computer, and if anyone else wants to join in and give out some pointers, we could do that too.
Mhm.
Let's
And I
all
see we have like 40 minutes left. And if we have time, like we'll do like a harder question. So let me just go to LeetCode. Contains.
let's all pair program. 36 of us.
Yep.
36 of us on the same problem.
Okay, let me clear my solutions really quickly. Okay, so let me change the screen I'm sharing really quickly. So stop share. All right, can you guys see LeetCode on my screen?
Yep.
All right, so Connor, pick a language.
Let's stick with Python.
Python? Okay, cool. Now walk me through.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to start out with the naive solution like you discussed in one of your earlier slides.
Sure.
And so my idea there is to, we'll just walk through each item in the list and compare it to every other item in the list to see if it's already been shown, right? But as we walk through, we know that we've already seen all the items prior to this one, so we can just skip those when we continue walking.
Okay, what would the code for that look like?
Yeah, sure. So we just start off by throwing in a for loop. Since, let's see, we'll do it by index. Yeah, because we'd like to skip all the items prior to this one. And so then we want another for loop so that we can compare to all the other items. So we'll say, yep, j in range starting from I plus 1, to, yeah, the rest of the numbers. We'll say if nums I equals nums j, then we will return true. Otherwise, if like we walk through all those and there's nothing left, then we can return false.
Okay, cool. And can you tell me the asymptotic time and space complexity of your solution?
Yeah, sure. So the space would be linear because we're not making anything new. And let's see, I can't remember. I think the runtime of this might be n log n. Since we only compare each item with the items that haven't been compared yet. So I believe that would be, I can't remember exactly on that one. Either that or n squared.
It'll be n squared because like
It would be n squared. Okay.
Because like this loop would run n times, and then like for each time, this loop would also run like n minus 1 times.
Yes.
On
Okay.
the current index, so it would be n squared.
Okay. Yeah. Couldn't remember that one.
So what would be the space complexity of this?
Oh, yeah. I think Liam. Correctly, it's O of 1. I was incorrect. I forgot.
Yep, it's going to be O of 1 because you don't allocate any new like arrays to help you do this answers. Okay, now let's put Connor's solution to the test. Let's submit it and see if we can get a time complexity. Or let's see. Okay, so your solution clearly works. Let's see how many test cases you passed. So 17 out of 18 test cases bad.
Ah,
With that said, I want to ask you, do you see a way to improve this solution?
yeah. So one thing that would have been my question from earlier would have been, is the list sorted? And if not, can I sort it?
The list isn't sorted, and you can sort it.
Okay, so then I'd sort the list and step through and compare each element, starting maybe from the second element, compare it to the previous element, and just walk through all the items there.
Okay, cool. So according to you, we want to sort the list and walk me through the code in matching each the first element with the walk me through the code in matching adjacent elements is what
Yeah,
I'm
sure. So for the range, I'd change the range from 1 to the length.
Okay, so I have the length as the range right here.
Or from starting from 1 instead of 0.
Oh, starting from yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
because otherwise if we started off, what I'm planning on doing here is saying if nums I equals nums I minus 1, then return true.
Mm-hmm.
And if we were to leave that range alone, then it would throw an exception.
Yep. Okay, what should I do next?
Oh yeah, so nums I equals nums I minus 1.
Stellar move, Connor.
Thank you, Max.
Okay, and if they're equal, we return true, right?
Yep.
Looks good to me. What is the time complexity of this and space complexity?
So this one, space complexity would be the same. Time complexity would be, now it would be n log n, because sort has a runtime of n log n, and that dominates the linear complexity of the loop.
Yep. Now let's put your solution to the test. Okay, nice. Can you think of another way we might be able to improve this solution?
Another way, let's see. I'm not thinking of any right now. I guess.
Think of what a useful data structure would be.
Oh, a hash map or a set.
Exactly. Yep.
Ah. Yeah, I forgot that Python. I've never really worked with Python sets, so you're gonna have to help me out on this one.
Yeah, sure thing.
So initialize the set to some variable.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then going down to the bottom there, or get rid of the sort because we don't need that anymore. And then what we can do is just loop through, and then instead of that if comparison, we'll do if item is already in the set, then return true. But I'm not sure how to. Yep. Okay.
And
perfect. Yeah, I was just gonna say I didn't know how to see if it's inside.
And are you sure this loop range is still correct?
Oh, that should be changed to 0.
Yep. And what should I do if it's not in scene?
If it's not in scene, then add it to scene.
Yep. Okay, so what do you think of this solution?
I think it's a much better solution. Yeah, as you said, linear runtime and same space space complexity is a bit worse because we are creating that new set of everything else. So that would be the linear space complexity.
Yep, excellent. Let's run your code and see how well you did. Awesome. So that concludes this interview. Do you have any questions for me? I'm just joking.
I was gonna start throwing questions at you, but I guess not.
Okay. We have like 10 minutes left, so I don't think we'll have enough time to do H-index. So let me just wrap up this presentation at this point. Hold up. All right. Can you see this screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So I hope this workshop was useful and that there are a few takeaways that I want you guys all to have. So the purpose of these interviews is really about communication. And the process of doing those 6 steps I outlined is to really highlight your thought process, since that is what the interviewer evaluates you on. Second takeaway would just be to practice, practice, practice. You need to do those LeetCode problems so you can recognize patterns. And with enough time and effort, eventually these interviews will start to become predictable, and you'll say that, okay, I actually prefer this to those lengthy take-home projects. There are a couple of additional resources that I would highly recommend you to use. The first of them is my favorite, and I'm not sure why it isn't more popular, but the Tech Interviewing Handbook gives a more comprehensive guide on what you should do and expect during a coding interview. Even before a coding interview, this handbook will give you tips on how to improve your resume, how to prepare for behavioral questions, and after the interview, like it'll tell you tips about salary negotiation or what you can expect when actually starting your career. The other 3 resources are Geeks for Geeks, Codility, and HackerRank. Geeks for Geeks is just like, I think like if you Google an algorithm or just like research how to do an algorithm, Geeks for Geeks should be the first resource that pops up. Codility and HackerRank, these are websites like LeetCode, but the focus is kind of different. Like for Codility, the difference between Codility and LeetCode is that Codility times you for when you're doing problems and LeetCode doesn't. And HackerRank aims to, well, HackerRank problems usually are more verbose and lengthy. So, and some might ask you to parse the input yourself. So it's like more involved. And if that suits you, then I would use HackerRank. Final resource would be Nick White's YouTube channel. I mentioned previously that it might help to watch YouTube videos of people explaining LeetCode solutions. And Nick White is an excellent resource for that. And okay, yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. And if you have more questions, I'm always down to talk about LeetCode or coding interviews. So you can reach out to me at a link on my website or through my email. And with that said, thank you very much for coming to my workshop. You guys will do great. Good luck out there.
You guys would take a minute and just fill out the feedback form. That'll also give you a chance like asking questions that you didn't get to ask here. But thanks everyone for coming. Hope you learned something. And Brandon, thanks so much. Super important. Brandon, where are you doing your co-op now?
Where am I doing my co-op?
Yeah, didn't you accept an offer recently?
Yeah, I accepted an offer at MathWorks.
Yo, congratulations. It works out. He got a job, so can you.
Yep.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?
I just posted a question on the chat. Wanted to say them vocally. And do you have core practice sessions? And if you have, how is the structure of the meetings?
Mm-hmm. So I'm just taking a look at the chat right now. So do we have core practice sessions? Like, do you mean for like coding interviews?
Yes, yeah.
Unfortunately not. But I do run like a channel specifically in our Slack where I post daily LeetCode solutions. So I can explain to you my thought process behind these problems. Mm-hmm. So if that like interests you, I think somebody here should have the link to our Slack and you'd be able to join.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
if you're on the main Slack, you'll be able to see it there.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Why is Blind 75 good? Blind 75 is good because like it's just like a guide that was conceived by somebody who's like done lots of interviews, done lots of LeetCode questions, who's received offers from a lot of FANG type companies. And it's just like based on his experience, but other people seem to think it's good from that. And I have looked at the questions. They are very popular questions that teach you a lot behind the core approaches. So that's why I would recommend Blind 75 as a resource. No
I think
problem.
really it's because they hit the main points.
Yeah, it really like gives you the problems that like you need to do. Like the ones that aren't downvoted, that like are upvoted a lot, and get straight to the point. Okay.
All right. I hope you guys all have a great night. It's good to see everyone. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Bye guys.